and welcome to Glasgow in 2024 Presents. My name is Esther McCallum-Stewart and I'm the chair of the Glasgow in 2024 Worldcon bid, and I'm really excited to be introducing you to our online events. I hope you enjoy this event, and if you do, why not take a moment to see what else we have coming up online at glasgow2024.org. All of our events are broadcast live, but if you want to watch or listen again, you can find them all online at our YouTube channel. Please feel free to join in the conversation on social media. We'll be using the hashtag #GIN2024 across Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. And you can also find us there at Glasgow in 2024. If you would like to become a supporter of the bid, you can do so at glasgow2024.org/pre-support. Or if you want to volunteer to get involved, then please check out our volunteer page on our website. We can't currently be together, but we do hope we can bring a little bit of the Glasgow 2024 spirit and joy to you wherever you are in the world. Enjoy the event and thank you.
Brilliant. So welcome everybody to one of our Glasgow 2024 streamed events. So we're discussing the anthology Silk and Steel, and we have three of the authors and editors involved with us today. I'm part of the promotions team, and my qualification for moderating this discussion is that I'm a keen reader of sci-fi and fantasy and romance. My name's Kate Towner, so welcome to our streaming discussion. If the guests could please turn on their cameras and microphones. Hello, welcome everybody. So I'm just going to hand over to all of you to introduce yourselves, starting with Jennifer, please.
Well, hello then. I'm Macy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from sunny Seattle, where it is currently heading for another 37°C day. And this is of course, the unceded Duwamish territory. And I am an author, a poet, an accidental anthologist, and a podcaster with the Be the Serpent podcast. The anthology is Silk and Steel, Macy. The podcast is Be the Serpent, which, if you want to hear more of me yelling about queer things, that's where it's at. And you can find all of my stuff at englishmace.com. I think that's all of the things. Did I introduce myself successfully?
I think so.
Close
Janine.
enough.
I'll be much shorter. Hi, I'm Janine A. Southard. I am the editor of Silk and Steel. And when it comes to writing and editing, my mission is basically to find optimism and fun, which I hope came out in Silk and Steel for those of you who read it. And I guess the only thing that I'm really promoting right now is, in fact, Silk and Steel. So thank you all for being part of this.
Beautiful. And Django.
Hi, I'm Django Wetzler. I write mostly fantasy with a little bit of science fiction. So my current main series is Ashes of the Sun, and my most recent release is a novella called Hard Reboot from Tor.com, which is actually began life as a story for this anthology and then grew to be 30,000 words and wouldn't fit, so I had to write a different story. But yeah, I'm so glad to be here.
No, it's a chunky book, but we couldn't fit a novella.
Yeah.
This is always you, Django. This is always you. The last time you wrote
If you look at
the last time he wrote a short story for an anthology for me, it ended up being, it was like a novelette. I was like, okay.
It was like 20,000 words.
Yeah, I fit it in. It was good.
It was good.
Made it work.
Brilliant. Now I'm just going to do a little bit of the housekeeping stuff so everyone in the audience knows how we're going to be playing things today. So we've got about an hour and a half altogether. We're going to start off with Macy doing a reading in a minute. We'll have about 20 minutes at the end for audience questions. So if you want to submit questions, you can either do so on Twitter or on the Facebook live stream. And I think maybe on Instagram, I'm not 100% sure of that. So on all of those, it's the username is Glasgow in 2024, all one word. The hashtag is #G in 2024. So it looks very much like Gin 2024, but GIN 2024. So if you submit questions there, our kindly support team are going to funnel those to me and I'll ask them in the audience question section. Cool. So I will hand over to Macy for the reading. If you could
Alrighty.
tell us briefly what you're reading from first.
Well, I will be reading from this little anthology called Silk and Steel. I just need to show off that cover art first because we had some brilliant artists involved in the campaign. And I will be reading from my short story for this anthology, which is called In the Salt Crypts of Jarell. And so you have a muted microphone, Django, if you're speaking to me.
Do you think we should give a brief explanation of what Silk and Steel is before we start?
That sounds like a great idea. Janine? As our editorial in
Wait,
charge.
how did I get volunteered? This
You're
was
the
Django's
editor.
idea.
You're the
I can do it.
editor, Janine.
Oh, I want to hear Django do it now that he said he's
Okay,
going to.
now.
Let's hear.
It's I mean the genesis was a particular image that turned up on Twitter, and actually a fan art image of a princess and a swordswoman in a sort of maybe rivalry, maybe romantic sort of thing. And a bunch of people sort of chimed in on the thread like, oh man, I want to read that story. And enough of them were professional writers that Macy and I got together and we were like, you know, maybe we could actually do that. So we emailed a bunch of people and asked how serious they were, and a bunch of them were serious. So I went to Janine, who is an editor that I've worked with before, and said, you want to do this project with us? And we did.
No, that is not what you said, by the way. You said, would you come to coffee with us and tell us about how editing and Kickstarter works
I didn't
for
want to
indie publishing?
volunteer you for the project. I wanted
Yeah, and then by the end of lunch, I was like,
Gentle coercion is far
well,
better.
not what I
This would be
expected
a
from
lot of
lunch.
work.
I think we're going to get into the whole story of it a little bit later.
Oh,
in some
that's
questions
right.
This is
section.
in fact one of my questions later on, yeah.
Yes, so
We're
for
jumping
the
the gun
context
here.
of this story, dear listeners, we are an anthology of 17, I want to say, stories featuring one woman who wields weapons, so swordswoman broadly interpreted, and one diplomat, mage, like more like soft skills sided protagonist, and then they kiss, basically, TLDR. Swordswomen and princesses. Okay, so I'm going to jump us in the second scene of my story because I have great faith in all of your abilities to go with the flow, and this one's more fun. So let's start there. Probably quick summary of the first scene. In the first scene, our main character, Elan, a guardswoman, has gotten in trouble for having arrested the Crown Duchess of a neighboring country who was just standing in a corridor minding her own business. Didn't go great for her. Nobody is covered in glory. So let's start. Like the Crown Duchess's arrival was a signal, salt-wreathed Jarell goes from fortress to circus overnight. Carriage after carriage, shorecraft after riverboat, by dirigible and even by dromedary train, dignitaries stream through Jarell's crystal gates and up her cliffs from the perilously hungry sea. There are dukes and marquesses and clan heads, 2 tussling mage schools from opposite corners of the Psychoa wastes, and a prince of flame from clear across the sundering ocean, all bound for his highness's coronation. Not that Elan has seen so much as a glimpse. For her catastrophic fuck-up with the Crown Duchess of Mern, the captain has bolted her to the most depressingly static station upon which he can justify wasting 2 fully armoured gendarmes. She's pulling double shifts, barely time to stuff bread and cheese into her face before falling into a fitful sleep. The other gendarmes avoid her gaze, like her new station's the catching kind of curse. It didn't used to be this way. Guarding Prince Aran's door in the lead-up to the coronation should have been an honour and a joy. It isn't. Since the funeral, grief has burned their laughing, moon-bright prince away to a husk. Oh, he does the minimum required for the revelry. He sits at high table during dinner and opens the dances and welcomes the diplomats before running back to the dark silence of his rooms. But he does so wound tight with clothing, collars pulled high enough to hide half his face, eyes bruised-looking, and hands flinching from contact. Even the sound of silverware makes him wince. He eats his meals in private. It isn't Elan's place to worry. She's just a guard. But then again, she's not sure there's anyone left whose place it would be. Her partner at guard certainly doesn't seem to. Mind you, it's entirely plausible that Guillain had all fellow feeling bleached out of him as a child. If not, then losing his partner to the depth spawn has certainly finished the job. Food's late, she says, because it's true, and because if she stands here much longer, she's going to scream. I'm going to check. She makes it 3 strides before Guillain whisper yells, "Come back here," after her. Elan pauses. "We're here to keep him safe," she says, and keeps it simple, like he's a child. Starved isn't safe, nor's poisoned if someone intercepted it. But Sundering Seas, Guillain, leave off. I'll be back before anyone knows it. Frankly, she could stay away long enough to cook His Highness's dinner herself and still expect that to be true. And she's a god's awful chef. Surely you can hold your piss for half an hour. She leaves him there, gaping like a fish, and tries to squash the spiteful flash of pleasure at knocking him off his dignity before she gets tempted to do it again. Reaching the kitchens kills what's left of that petty joy faster than snuffing a candle. They're quiet. The kitchens are never quiet. Cooks and pages and wood-bearers alike have clotted around a wound in the middle of the floor. A fallen boy, a tray spilled, and a dark-haired kneeling figure in layer upon layer of thin-spun robes. What happened? Elan demands, grabbing a page girl near the back of the pack. Simo just fell, the girl answers, her jaws slack. She can't be more than 13, 14, barely as high as Elan's shoulder. Cook yelled he wasn't breathing, and then the lady, she... Simo, that's the prince's page, isn't it? Air mage, another woman says, hair braided back and netted like a baker. She nods grimly. Pulling the breath back, most likely. Lucky she was passing. Poor kid. Run ragged must be to collapse like that. Elan carefully pushes through the crowd, nudging people apart with her spear butt. It's the Crown Duchess of Mern at the centre of the circle, dark lashes fanned across those high-boned cheeks, motionless, as if she's posing for a coinsmith. Because that's precisely Elan's luck. Air mage, though. All right. Not just a froth of fabric and jewels after all. The Crown Duchess hovers one hand over the fallen boy's still face, the other over his chest. If Elan listens closely, she can hear a thin, musical hum, wavering like light on the ocean. The kitchen's staff whispers easily drown it. Ah, fuck. If that chef's to be believed, then the noble arrived only after the boy fell. She can't have caused it. She's trying to help. Elan passes a hand over her face and turns, putting her back to the pair. Captain's gonna have her head for getting within a spear's length of the woman, but there's a child at risk. Elan braces her feet, plants her spear, and lifts her chin. Make space, she says, pulling parade ground pitch and posture around her like a surcoat. Step back! With the grumbling noise of thwarted gossip, the crowd disperses. Elan glares the last few stragglers into submission, makes sure someone is sent for a physician, and circles to kneel cacophonously on the other side of the fallen child. It's undeniably the prince's page. Not only does the royal blue uniform mark his rank, the boy is a fostering noble from one of the southern kingdoms, with a skin a brown almost as dark as his close-curled hair. She's seen him frequently this past week. His chest moves, though barely. The Crown Duchess is frowning. What do you need? Elan asks, and the woman's face tilts towards her. I thought I recognized that voice, she says, without opening her eyes. Her smile is thin. Do you sing, gendarme? You've the lungs for it. Well enough, Elan replies, bemused. Give me 5 notes, then, ascending and descending, slowly. It's a voice used to unquestioning obedience. If she resents past indignities at Elan's hands, the feeling has been buried in impeccable etiquette. So Elan sings. The Crown Duchess does something complicated with her hand, and then her eyes blink open. Simo's chest continues to rise and fall, tied to the rhythm of Elan's voice. "There's something," she murmurs, leaning over the boy's face. She peels his lips back and runs her finger over his teeth before Elan can say a word. Not that she would, trapped as she is, humming Simo's lungs full and then empty again. It's a queer sensation. Magic doesn't run in her family, and Elan has never so much as stirred the brine in an offering dish. Does the Crown Duchess feel this powerful all the time? It would explain the way she holds herself. Even kneeling on the grubby tiled kitchen floor, the line of her shoulders is as straight as a sword. Her sleeves are rumpled, and she's getting spit on her fingers, and she still looks like a statue sprung to life. Elan yanks her attention back where it belongs. While she's allowed herself to become distracted, said distraction has stuck half her hand down the page boy's throat. "What are you?" Elan says, forgetting, and the boy's ribs stutter. "Keep singing," the noble snaps, though Elan has already realized her mistake and is grasping frantically for lost notes. She goes too fast, too high, loses control, and the boy gasps, back arching off the tiled floor, jaw clenching. The noble swears, or possibly casts, Elan barely knows enough Murnish not to get swindled, and yanks her hand free, skin scraping against teeth. There's a long strand of something sickly greenish white clutched between her fingers, emerging from the boy's mouth. The Crown Duchess keeps pulling, muttering under her breath. Elan can't look away, song trailing uselessly off. It's impossible, it's nauseating, and it's clearly hurting the boy. Eventually, the Crown Duchess sits back on her heels, hands tangled with a red-flecked mass of strands, and the boy gasps on his own, ragged and out of sync. His eyes shoot open. His previously limp hand clutches at his chest. A look of bewildered shock crosses his face. And then the tears. As a cook bundles the child away towards hot drinks and soothing words, Elan leans in. "Is that?" she asks quietly, staring. The mage doesn't even glance up from examining the mass of plant life. "Oh, no, no," she says, voice sweet. "Of course it couldn't be anything to do with the strange growths I was investigating when a gendarme so diligently took it upon herself to escort me from the back corridors without so much as a sample. The flower has thorns, it seems." Flustered, Elan swallows a strange burst of guilt. She starts and stops. The Crown Duchess has dropped her pointedly vacant smile and is carefully pinching a segment from near the vine's tip. The fibrous mass from inside Simo's lungs is largely without leaves, but near the top, where it would have reached the open space of the boy's mouth and nestled in behind his teeth, several sharp green teardrops unfurl. Damn it, Elan recognizes those leaves. The Forsaken Woman had been holding a plant with identical ones down in the crypts. A plant Elan had knocked to the ground, and presumably trampled when she'd seized, cuffed, and dragged her prisoner before the captain. A plant Elan had assumed the woman smuggled in to use as a pretext for her infiltration. "Is it a curse?" Elan asks. Her voice isn't quite low enough, and a prep chef fumbles a chop on a nearby bench, knocks an onion to the floor. They're being watched. If something evil is taking root in Jarrell, gossip and panic will only spread it faster. Elan shifts closer to the noble. "Maybe." The Crown Duchess frowns over her sample. Up close, Elan notes golden flecks in her brown eyes, like the speckled feathers of a falcon. Her olive skin is very smooth. "I don't know yet, but either way, it's bad." Elan is a professional. She is a highly trained, highly disciplined member of an elite armed force of guardsmen and women who have protected Saltreath Jarrell for generations against enemies foreign and domestic and sub-oceanic alike. She needs to report this immediately. It's beyond suspicious. Why would a foreign mage, unfamiliar with the palace, be the one to catch a disharmony this severe? There's an undeniable chance Nicolia's behind it, or at least familiar with its origins. But how would the homegrown priests and secular brine mages have noticed? Those who survived the attack, which took their majesties, have exhausted themselves on repairs. Elan can't say she's seen robe nor scepter inside the palace for a week or more. All their fears are turned out to the sea, to the things which lurk beneath the waves. There's no attention left for trouble within salt-carved Jarrell. The Crown Duchess's robes are speckled with blood. She's ruined them to save a servant boy. And even now, with Elan kneeling before her in full armour, spear close at hand, her attention is on the vine, not the threat. Elan is struggling to keep her gendarmerie-trained paranoia pointed where it should be. Besides, if she takes this to the captain, like she should, he's just going to think she's holding a grudge. He's more likely to take back her tunic and put her out to pasture, no matter how little he can afford to lose another spear these days. No, she's alone in this. She needs to figure it out herself. Ta-da! And then they get into trouble, surprising no one.
Sorry, I managed to leave my mute button on. Classic mistake. Cool. So thank you very much, Macy. That was lovely. And of course, people should buy the book and read the rest of the story.
And many more like that.
Indeed, yes. So you did start into my first question just now, which is the story of how you came to put this anthology together. So my second question is about Kickstarter. So if you go as far as the Kickstarter bit, but don't, then I'll come into that question. But I think that starts.
Jumping the gun.
No, that's the fun. But I think that starts with you, Macy, doesn't it, as the beginning of the story?
Well, I think it sort of does. So I am a horrible internet gremlin who starts trouble on Twitter for fun. And by trouble, I mostly mean swearing to start anthologies that I have absolutely no intention of actually creating. And I mean, there's many in the past. I've threatened to create tree anthologies and like ocean anthologies. And so we came across this piece of art, this gorgeous piece of art, which, gosh, the name is escaping me of the artist. Al Norton, there we go, which you can probably still find on Twitter if you go and have a look, that was getting some attention. And I retweeted it saying, you know, Swordswoman X Princess, the anthology. Oh, I think that came a couple of tweets down the right line. And a few people, I want to say Aliette de Bodard, K.A. Dor, and Django replied saying, oh man, I would write for these two. And we said, you know,
Indeed.
Let's not write for the artist's original characters, but we can certainly pick up on the theme. And we got ourselves in trouble on the internet.
Well, I feel like the next step was we emailed all these people who had said, oh, I would totally do that. And we're like, do you mean that? Or are you just, you know, tweeting? And enough of them said yes.
Basically, all of them said yes, which was, I was like, I'm suspicious of this.
Yeah. And we were like, well, there's enough, like, you know, names here that people would probably go for a Kickstarter, because that's, you know, Kickstarter wise, that feels like the first hurdle is you need to get, you know,
you get recognition.
The great thing about Kickstarter for anthologies is that you sort of start with a few well-known people that get people to sort of pledge, but then if it does well, then you can offer more space and buy stories from people who are not necessarily as well known, which Janine had a ton of fun doing, I'm sure. And that's great, because then you can have more stories, more variety of stories. And so it felt like we had enough names to kind of get the Kickstarter off the ground. But I've never done anything like that before. Have you guys ever done a Kickstarter before this? I had never.
Janine
done a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Including for an anthology. Though for the anthology that I did it for, I did not have the cachet of big names. It was really more geared at people who already knew me as opposed to people who already knew the authors. So that was really fun. This was very different in that respect. Yeah. The Kickstarter, I'm going to jump ahead. Yeah. We're going to jump ahead on you, Kate. I apologize, but it was really surprising. we planned out all of the stretch goals that we were going to have, and we thought, oh, we're never going to get past this point, but we'll plan a couple of steps past whatever this point was, and we blew past it on the first day.
And we're sitting there going like
we don't have a good plan.
We were kind
Django's
of
freaking
scrambling.
out about, we're too successful, I don't know what to do, kind of thing, which is the best opportunity to freak out. Way better than nothing's working, right? So much better than that. So
There's a lot of frantic updating of spreadsheets to be
Yes.
like, oh,
Yes.
you know, what can we
Like,
offer
when
people?
can we buy another author? We had a few of our, so the other thing is that like this works mostly because both Django and I are very online, and many of the other contributors are also very online. And so when we started tweeting about it, it went around Twitter, and Ellen Kushner was like, man, I would have loved to be involved in this. And we're like, can we? And then Yoon Harley was like,
Hey.
oh, this sounds super cool. I love swords. And I'm like, could we?
Wow.
So we're just like
And we
quietly
could.
being like, yeah. And there were a few other people who were also super interested who'd reached out to me beforehand. And I was like, we're not planning on offering stretch goal authors. And then everything changed. And we're like, we have to, because we have too much interest. We need to give back more to be worth this much money. You know, it feels like at a certain point, you can't just be like, well, we wanted 8,000 as our stretch goal and we've got that, so we're going to give you exactly what it was and pocket the difference. That doesn't feel right? We wanted to do more with the money.
That's why, you know, part of our stretch goals had always been to sort of raise the per word rate, you know, working our way up to pro payment. And I was really glad we were able to do that.
And also to be able to pay all of our editors professional rates, because
Yes.
our early goals had included like friend rates and like wink, wink, nudge, nudge rates. And so it was great to be able to pay everyone for their work.
yeah,
when we
this is
first-
actually, sorry.
I was just saying, when we first went to Janine, we're like, okay, what's the absolute minimum that we would need to actually make this book real? And we went, okay, well, we know a guy and he'll do me a favor and do the cover for less or whatever. And so then after it was really successful, we're like, okay, well, you know, let's pay all these people actual going rate instead of like please, sir, may I have a cover?
Yeah, the one that excited me personally the most was our copy editor, who her friend rate for me personally was she was going to do it for free if she had to. And we got to pay her full editorial freelance rates. And that alone made me so happy. And then layout, and every single artist for the art cards,
Yes.
where we got to say, because some of them had lower posted rates on the internet that we had originally talked to them about. And then we got to pay them the same, all at the same.
Yeah,
higher
we
rate
were like,
work.
we got a lower quotes, and
so
I'm like,
great.
I'm not going to pay some of you less than
Right.
others for the exact same work. Like, you're all getting paid real money for this work. And another thing with the Kickstarter that I really loved was because of the topic of this anthology. A lot of the professional SF&F anthologies don't always reach out to the parts of the internet who write a lot of fiction, but a lot of it has other people's characters in it. So this campaign actually did pretty well on Tumblr as well. And so I posted it around on Tumblr, and I want to say we had from that a few contributors who have been writing queer romances for years, if not decades, but this was their first professional sale because they're writing in a different context usually. And so I was super excited to be able to offer that at the slush pile.
I know
Definitely.
loads of great writers in the fanfic community.
Amazing writers, yes.
And I do think that's part of how queer fiction has become more normalized in the genre nowadays, because a lot of the people who started in fanfic have progressed to professional work, or, you know, do both at the same time.
Well, and I think that's always been the case over the years, but it's now more open.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you. So, so actually, you're again leaping ahead in my question list, but one of the things that I really noted reading the anthology was, you know, how diverse, given that you've got a relatively narrow subject matter, the diversity of the authors, the characters, the genres that you're writing in. You know, some of them are very humorous, some of them are very, of very serious books, you've got really wide range of contributors and styles and genres and everything. So how much of that was, baked into the whole idea of the anthology from day one? How much of it, I think, Janine, you mentioned looking for that as an editor. So how did that happen? What's the story there?
Well, I can't speak to the Macy's way of getting all of our main contributors or Kickstarter contracted contributors, but they did turn out to be quite a diverse group in a lot of ways. But in terms of the stories themselves, I had a method. Before everybody started writing their stories, the Kickstarter contracted people, I said, okay, if you could all send me your top 2 ideas before you start writing. So that if everybody wants to write, suboceanic monsters in a sort of French historical setting, maybe I can convince a few of you that you should have, like, I don't know, Martian monsters instead. Or your second ideas will be different, right?
It's like,
so
maybe Macy, you could not have a flute.
Right, there you go. Oh yeah, that's right. You had a flute in your first version. But if you've read the rest of the anthology, Aliette de Baudard's story is entirely flute duels. And I was like, Macy, does it need to be a flute? Could they do something else? And she was like, singing's great, other wind instruments. Yeah, that worked out beautifully. Or when, so I didn't tell people like, Django, you must write space smugglers, right? But he sent me, here are my 2 ideas. And I was like, great, your first idea is not clashing with anybody else's. And then as the open call submissions came in, I got to sort of say, okay, I know what the contracted stories are going to be. And sometimes it's really a shame, right, when they're very similar to a contracted story. I actually had one from the open call that I went back and forth doing developmental edits with the author, I think like 3 or 4 rounds. It's a great story. But yeah, it's got suboceanic stuff and and all these different political things happening and some, yeah, anyway. I love this story and it was wonderful and we worked it into a beautiful spot. And then I got the final Kickstarter contracted story back. And I was like, oh, we've now hit too many things with each of these same themes and I can't take it. And I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I hope that you enjoyed the experience of working with me, but, but I couldn't do it. And I felt so bad because it was like that last story came in so late. But that's sort of how it goes. And then tell me if this is too much detail on how people put together stories in an anthology. But I have a method of how I decide the order of stories. And it starts with, I get a vague idea of what stories number 1, 3, and the last one are going to be. I can go deeper into that if anybody really wants to know. But so those are my anchor pieces. And after that, I had this giant spreadsheet of themes and concepts. So it's like established relationship or new relationship, and it's down the spreadsheet, or duel or not a duel, right? In space, in a historical setting, I don't know, it's got plants. Like if you could possibly make it a theme that more than 3 stories had, I had this giant spreadsheet. And then I'm like color coding as I'm trying to make it so that nothing is next to something else that's too similar, thematically speaking, so that as you're reading it, if you read it completely in order, you don't get, wow, I thought this was an anthology that was really open, but really it turns out to be, everybody does a duel. I didn't realize this is a dueling anthology. And then story 5, there's not a duel. And you think, what is happening? Why isn't there a duel? I was waiting for it, right? So yes, that bit definitely is by design. And I will
it's like
jump
how
ahead a little bit,
randomization, like when a human randomizes something, they always make it evenly spaced out rather than like if something's random, it might easily be all clumped in the beginning. So you have to look random.
At one point, I thought about just alphabetizing by author's name and being like, is it actually different? Are the stories different enough? Can I convince somebody that this was like a complete mistake?
Whenever they do that, I end up at the
silly.
end. It's terrible.
Oh no, I could have done reverse alphabetical for you.
God.
First name, no problem.
Amazing.
No, but yeah, that was actually
sun sign.
Yeah, there you go. I love that. You have to ask everybody though, what is your sign? But no, another interesting thing actually that I thought that was different about this anthology than others was I got a lot of open call and even the Kickstarter contracted ones, actually, I got a lot of things that were very similar in some way or another. And I think that was really based upon the art. Like we did get a lot of duels, we did get a lot of swords. But wow, oh my goodness, I could have put together an entire anthology of amazing stories that were all swordswoman duels Regency. Like, it was beautiful. There were a lot of really beautiful
I would
Regency
read that.
stories. I would also read that, but I tried to keep it to like 3 or 4 in this actual anthology, since we didn't tell people, hey, by the way, it's a Regency antho. No, but we could have, and it would be beautiful.
Yeah.
And
And
if
it would
you have
be
enough
weird to
people
have-
who would love to buy it, let me
It
know.
would be weird to have about 16 Regency stories and then one set in outer space.
Yes, yes, it would.
Well, I feel
I'd
like
had
we
you
a
rewrite
fair
it,
few-
Django.
Yeah.
You can write it in Regency style.
There were pirates.
Sure.
The Regency had pirates. You could do a
Regency-
privateer one.
Exactly. It'd be perfect.
But I do also feel that sometimes having a narrow core makes it easier to have a wide variety of stuff. Because
Yes.
it's like a lot easier to seed off of something. Like I did a friend anthology a while back where the prompt was every story has to be airship pirate wizards.
Sounds good.
And there was so many completely different things. It's Skies of Wonder, Skies of Danger, and you can find it on Amazon. It was a great fun project, but they were all so different.
I
Because
love
it was super
narrow
constrained.
calls. Although sometimes they can cause problems if you write something for a narrow call and they don't end up taking it, and then you can't sell it somewhere else. But if someone invites you to an anthology, like Janine invited me to a SFF erotica in a coffee house anthology called Coffee Hot, and that's I wrote a story for that, which
That was so good.
to date the only erotica short that I've ever written, and it was a ton of fun. It ended up being great.
And long.
Yeah.
Yes, it was definitely the longest one.
Yes, so Mace and Django, you both wrote your stories specifically for this anthology, didn't you?
Mhm.
So can you tell us, well, I'm going to take you in reverse order. So Django, since you're at the end of the alphabet, can you tell us a bit of, I have sympathy with my surname begins with T. Can you tell us a bit about your process first, and then I'll come to you, Macy?
Yes, Django, tell us about your process.
My process is a little weird for this one because I got this inspiration for what I thought was going to be the Silk and Steel story over Christmas break. So I was sort of away from my computers and I couldn't write anything. I was sort of taking notes on my phone and I just kept thinking of more and more stuff. And so I finally got home and I started writing this story and I'm like, okay, I can keep it in, 7,000, 8,000 words. And it didn't work. And it, just started, I got to 7,000 words and blew past it and kept going. And I was like, well, maybe I'll have to cut it down later. And then when I finally finished, it was like 32,000. And I'm like, cutting it down would kind of, what?
You popped up in like a Slack or a chat or something. I was in sort of nervously saying it's at 12,000 now. And I don't think
Yes.
it's done. And I'm just like, Django, Django, Janine is going to murder you.
Well, and finally at the end, I was like, there's no way I can edit this down without just ruining it. So I put that aside. And fortunately, we had plenty of time because, it was relatively early. And so I, brainstormed another story based on another idea. I knew I wanted to do sci-fi, sort of space pirate stuff. And so that's kind of where this came from. It's got some little bits of pastiche in there. There's kind of a Han and Leia thing going on with the sort of smuggler and the princess, because that's kind of my favorite smuggler princess relationship, and doing it as a queer relationship is a lot of fun.
For mine, I remember us all kind of sprawled out on my carpet and you two saying, sort of having a conversation about like, where do we want to draw the lines for this anthology? We're like, well, we don't really want to go full erotica, so we're going to say like, keep it below this level. And you two looking at each other and going, yeah, and no actual horror. No horror. And I'm sitting there going, little bit of horror? Can I have a little, define horror? If they manage to defeat the monster, can I have a horror monster? And then it's just an adventure story, right, guys? Because I already knew that I wanted to do foreign diplomat and guard deal with a horrible plant demon that has eaten the heir to the throne. Spoilers for stories that we wrote. and are now discussing. And I wrote it, and it was too long. And so I cut off 1,000 words and I sent it to Janine. And Janine was like, Macy, delete the first scene. I'm like, okay. So I deleted the first scene, which was like 1,500 words. And Janine's like, I think you need a little bit more at the end. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and got it back up to the same length, having deleted the entire first scene. And I'm like, damn it. So TLDR, Janine is very good at editing things, but I'm very bad at keeping them short. I think all of the stories in this anthology are like in the 6,000 to 7,000 word range, which is above what we'd originally intended to even offer. But I think that when you have to combine, we wanted all of the stories to have either an adventure or a quest or a mystery or something, like a plot, and also there had to be a romance of some sort, even if it was an existing relationship. And also it had to have 2 fully developed main characters. That's a lot to ask of a short story. I think Mary Robinette Kowal has an equation where she's like, each of these elements adds 1,000 words. And I think that kind of already put us at a minimum of 5,000, really, if we were thinking about it, which we weren't. But I'm very slow at writing short fiction. So it took me 3 months to write a 7K, and it took Django 3 months to write a novella and a 7K short. So, you know, we got there.
I actually ended up writing the whole novella in about 8 days. It may be the most productive I've been in a long time. Sometimes, you know, it's just, it's ready. Not always.
On thin ice, Django.
Usually it takes me longer.
Thin ice.
Well, he had to think about it for weeks and weeks before he could actually write it. So there's a lot of background
I was
processing,
very ready.
not counting in terms of the words. You're okay.
So is this, so Janine, is this like a herding cats type of job?
There was definitely a lot of elements of that. It was actually interesting. I'm really glad that we had so much interest in it, because nobody predicted that the pandemic was going to hit. And so that happened like just as the first stories were rolling into me. There were a number of authors from our contracted Kickstarter people who were like, you know, I told you that I could do this, but it turns out a few had to drop out. Some just really had to be late. They were like, look, things are happening. And there's no way to be unsympathetic to that, right? It's like, oh, I'm so sorry that you're stuck in a different place, or like your life is falling apart, right?
Ellen Kushner had written the whole story, but it was on a physical notebook that was in Paris.
No, I think the notebook was in New York, but she was stuck in a, I don't remember,
different state, and
different
like couldn't get hold of it. Like, well, that's, the entire story exists, but you're just gonna have to trust me, because I can't get it.
Exactly. So that was fun. Yeah, and then just people who were like, I'm sorry, like somebody in my family has COVID. I'm not writing right now.
No, right.
And
well, in the disaster year of 2020, you really can't blame anyone.
No, not at all. But that definitely made, okay, who do I wait for? Who do I say, you know what, that's fine. Don't even worry about it. What does that mean when I'm talking back and forth with authors on their edits, right? Like when I say to Macy, hey, Macy, I need you to write an entire ending because I feel like it needs a different denouement. And she's like, sure. And then how fast are you going to write during, you know, emotional upheaval and all these other things that are happening? So there's a lot of that. Also, anybody who's a writer listening, this is the way to make your editor love you, is that you immediately say, oh, sure, I will write you that. And then you do it. And then you get it back to them early, even though your editor is not going to read it until like she's running late. Okay. So good job. I think Django at one point got edits back to me like within 2 days of me sending him an email. And I was like, this is wonderful. And you are my favorite author. And I'm not going to be done with them.
And I feel like
so
for people who haven't worked much with editors before, and I know this is an instinct I have to fight in myself. I have the instinct to like say I'll get it done quickly, even if I know that I can't. And that's like the opposite of what you want to do. So what I did with Janine is I remember I was like, I can't get to this. I will get it to you inside of 4 weeks. Can you do it in 4 weeks? And like 4 weeks is way too long for the edits I had to do, but I had other stuff going on. So I wanted to say, I will definitely have it to you before the end of 4 weeks, but don't promise early. Promise
from
late.
An organizer's point of view, promising quickly and getting it done is the top, but promising quickly and then failing to get it done is worse than promising slowly.
Yes, telling me at 4 weeks and getting it to me at 3.5, that's fine. I haven't even put you in my schedule yet. It's good. Yeah. Oh, anytime somebody tells me something like that, it goes immediately into my calendar because I live by my calendar.
You would not believe
so-
how many spreadsheets, Google Docs, and
Yeah,
calendars
lot.
this took. And
been
that's
a
with the
lot.
3 of us being in the same time zone and in the same city and able to like physically meet sometimes.
Well,
Yes.
kind of, except then towards
Except
the end.
the panini. One of my friends has taken to calling it the panini.
Yeah.
And now
The
it's stuck in
global
my
panini.
brain. The global
Love it.
panini.
Because towards the end, I was the one who did all the fulfillment stuff, and dealing with that in pandemic times, was exciting because some of our stuff came. I think the
We got all of
pins
these
came
eventually.
the pins came from China, and so there was like delays there, and then just dealing with the fulfillment company and their problems.
Whims.
There were a lot of problems. But it got there. Everybody got their books in the end.
Yes.
We think. We're still getting responses to our Kickstarter
I don't
poll.
understand that. If you're filling out the Kickstarter survey for this project now, it's too late. I get one like 1 or 2 every week, and I'm just like, why are you
sorry?
doing that?
I mean, I guess maybe then they can pick up their ebook link.
I guess
Yes.
so, but I don't. Well, anyway.
Yeah, I don't
Sorry.
follow the Kickstarter. The messages section, of course, should come to an email for somebody, and it comes to my assistant, who, of course, also isn't checking it anymore because it's,
nothing
it's
we
been
can do now.
quite some time. But then, like every now and then, it's like, oh, I accidentally logged into the Kickstarter, Janine, and there's like 3 messages, and it's always something like the 2 of them are fine. They're just like, hey, I got my stuff, thanks, and I'm like, oh, I wish I had gotten that, 2 months ago. But I will immediately write back. And then the 3rd one will be like, hey, Django, can you send this person some extra pins because they're missing them or something? And we try, we do our best, but
Well, the
there's
thing was
definitely, yes, a
also-
point past which.
There's
We-
one reward left.
Yeah.
Somebody,
Yes, we're still
I
working
don't
on.
even know who pledged for
The box.
a copy of the book signed by all the authors.
Yes.
And the authors
Oh,
are
right.
fairly widely spread.
Mhm.
And so this
We
is
got some
taken a very long
Australians.
time.
We got someone in Singapore. We've got
The box has, starting here in Seattle, the box has made its way all the way across the United States. And the next stop is the UK, and then Ireland, and then France, and then on to Asia. So it'll probably be another 6 months.
it'll be like
before we do it.
2025.
Yes.
Yeah, before we get there.
But I think we have
I-
thoroughly derailed Kate's questions at this point
Sorry.
with our
No,
chattering.
I'm sorry, Kate, bring us back to topic, please.
No, the best panels are the ones that have a life of their own. But I did want to ask you, because I mentioned in my intro that I'm a keen reader of both sci-fi and romance, and certainly, 20 years ago, that was very much a never the twain shall meet. The few people, I mean, Ellen Kushner and so on, were writing queer romance in sci-fi back then, but it was pretty uncommon. So I didn't, and that it feels to me like that's shifted a lot nowadays. So I don't know if you want to say anything about the history of romance within sci-fi or sci-fi within romance.
Well, I do want to talk a little bit about this idea that particularly FF sci-fi fantasy romance is a new thing, because it's really not. There's a long, long history of lesbian pulps. And there's an article you might be interested called No Adam for Eve by Chloe Maville. But lots and lots of books about, oh, there's no men left in the world and we're going to have to scientifically invent a way to maintain the human race. All of this sort of stuff. In the 50s and the 60s, massive amounts of output by people like Anne Bannon and the Bibu Brinker Chronicles, stuff like that. And it's just not at all considered to be part of the SFF canon. Right, and so it's kind of a little bit forgotten. It's a little bit hard to get hold of. Wasn't always sold at major bookshops. Certainly not coming into reprint now. Wasn't Big Five. Was maybe side publishers. And so that's something I want to make sure doesn't get erased when we're talking about this resurgence and this this sudden growth of queer relationships in SF&F. We're talking about mainstream publishing. We forget there's a lot of other stuff outside of that.
I guess I mean the sort of the visibility and the mainstreaming of queer stories and romance
Right.
stories in general.
I think that Well, the true reason as to why FF romance in this is probably because Macy. Because it was me who retweeted it in the first place. And pretty much everything I write centers a queer woman. That's just how I roll. That's why I write, is to say, hey, we're here, there's all sorts of different ways to be, and all of them are valid. And so that's normally my focus. And I know that Django, you have the Ship of Smoke and Steel is a great FFYA that I really enjoyed, with punching weird giant crabs in the face, which is a traditional sapphic bonding activity. I mean, you laugh, but like tide pooling isn't not. So I think that there is a lot more appetite for it these days. And I think a lot of people are just like, the younger millennials, the Gen Zs, just don't see any point in being coy about it. It's like, we are queer and we do want to read about us.
What I really like now, as things are becoming mainstream like this, and which I tried to do with Silk and Steel, is that these stories are not as much about how do we deal with a world in which we are not accepted.
Right.
These are the beauty of the sci-fi fantasy here, and this speculative fiction is, obviously we're accepted. The important thing that we need to deal with is, will she marry me or won't she marry me? Or, oh my gosh, there's a dragon, or whatever. Space aliens, right? That's the important part. And then obviously we have this lovely romantic element. And I think obviously those stories are important, right? About the world doesn't expect us. How do we move on? I'm not trying to say those aren't important, but I love that we've reached a point where for the mainstream audience, there's also space for all of these stories of, okay, if that's not the case, what do we have? Who are we? Who can we be? And that's beautiful to me. So
yeah,
I love the positivity of it.
I'm always sort of hesitant to pronounce on this topic because I've joked that I'm our anthology sort of token straight white guy. I do my best, but this is not my lane, so to speak. But one of the nice things, just on what Janine was saying about sci-fi fantasy specifically, is it gives you the ability to consider societies in which this is, completely without stigma. It's hard to write in a contemporary setting. Obviously we've made a lot of progress, and equally obviously there's a long way to go. But in a fantasy or a science fiction context, you can sort of set the parameters however you want, right? Whatever the social constructions that you want to examine are, you can make them be what you need them to be for the story. And that makes it really interesting and a good way to sort of get beyond, as Janine was saying, the sort of, fighting against oppression stories, which are wonderful, but not the only stories that we need.
I do think it's amusing to me. I'm coming to realize, I have never spent much time in sci-fi compared to fantasy, but I think you get more out of a background in sociology in writing sci-fi than you do in a background of physics.
That's true.
Because it's all about designing a future.
Who was it that said that, science is seeing the combustion engine and predicting the car. Science fiction is seeing it and predicting the traffic jam. Right, that it's the sort of social consequences of technology rather than its literal ability and power.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I never really understood why the two genres are considered to be separate myself. I mean, stories are about people, and romance is one of the things people do, surely. So.
It is also very funny, and this is something I've been struggling with a little bit for a while now, which is the idea of, if I want to write queer, do I have to write romance? Can I have, if I am writing stories about a queer character who doesn't have a relationship with someone else to show how they are queer, it's if the tree falls in the forest, does nobody hear it? And that's something that I think a lot of writers are asking ourselves, like, it's great and revolutionary to be allowed to have queer romance, but are we allowed to just be queer and have that be valid without having to prove it with, she kissed the girl and thus she is definitely a gold star lesbian, well done? I'm just like, could we not?
New anthology idea, Macy. Who wants to be in it?
Yeah, well,
no.
I don't know. There's a lot of people who are working in that space as well. It's just something that I hadn't realized I was allowed to do. And so I find myself, particularly in novel length projects, but also as we saw with short stories, having a developed romance line is words expensive, right? It costs space and attention. And I do wonder sometimes if by saying that in order for a queer author to like be bold and visible, their books have to have a romance, are we constraining what else they can do? And so I love books like Arkady Martine's A Memory Called Empire, where I guess there's kind of a little romance too, but that's not what it's about, but it's still hugely queer. And so I want to see more of that, as well as the romance, which I also love. I just want people to be able to have a free choice, right, about where they spend their words.
But nobody said, oh, I'm not going to believe your character's straight unless they get it on with someone, are they?
Right? Oh, yeah. Yes, exactly that.
In terms of those genres, it's almost, I always hate thinking about genres as these sort of boxes where, you put everything in one and everything in another. It's often just a change of emphasis. Are we falling in love while saving the world, or saving the world while falling in love? Right. It's just not good to think about them as these separate things. They exist to market books and to help readers find the kind of stuff they want. And so to the extent that they're useful, and if not, then not.
Right.
But
I will say, oh, go on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
That makes me suddenly wonder if the internet has collapsed categories to some extent, because I don't now find books by going to the bookshop and reading the sci-fi section.
I think that's true. It really has. That there are sets of books that I would associate with like a particular community on the internet, because they appeal to a certain set of tastes that don't match up neatly with traditional genre lines. Like there'd be books from YA and books from adult and books from fantasy and books from sci-fi and books from romance that just happen to be in line with a group of people who recommend a lot of books.
I will say Tor.com's novels tend to be doing a great job at being queer, just all of them. Have there been any straight ones? There must have been some.
I'm gone blank.
I haven't read them all. There are a lot of queer
ones.
There's probably some straights in the novellas, Django.
Probably. Question mark. I'm just pondering. Yeah, I don't know.
Yes, one of my other questions that I did have, and just so you're aware, by the way, we haven't had any questions come in from the audience yet. So just to reiterate to the audience, please do tweet us your questions, write it in the Facebook live stream. The hashtag is GIN2024, so GIN2024. But other than that, I guess we keep talking until some questions turn up. But I did want to ask you all if you've got recommendations of queer romance in SSF, or any recommendations really, but starting from that bucket.
Well, the story number 3 from our anthology by our own Freya Mask. Freya has a book coming out in November, A Marvelous Light, from Tor.com, which is an MM romance and also like detective boyfriends solve a murder and nearly get killed by a hedge. It's very English in some ways. There's a violent hedge maze and someone gets attacked by a swan, and there's an awkward dinner party or 3, so
You must be English, yes.
Well, she's actually Australian, but it's very traditional. So that's the first one that comes to mind.
I'm looking through my list of books here.
Gosh, others. C.L. Polk, obviously, Witchmark and the rest. God, again, it's all of my books are upstairs and it's too hot to think. Janine, go.
I can tell you, I don't know, I'm very bad at this, but I can tell you the book that I'm currently reading, which might help. Perhaps, or you'll all be like, no, I read that. What are you thinking? But I'm about halfway through Change of Plans by KJ, which is the world's most
KJ Charles?
No, KJ, no last name. Yes, it's a lesbian romance in modern day Melbourne. It's contemporary. It is like it is as contemporary romance as any contemporary romance I have ever read in my life. And it is so far, I'm only halfway through, super fluffy, you know, everything that's happening. And oddly, I've seen this in a couple of romance books lately. It's also sort of a mental health issues book, because the main character very clearly has sort of OCD issues, but they don't take over her life, which I also think is really exciting. Like, she goes and talks to her therapist and she does what the therapist says, and she's doing better and perfectly capable of functioning, as opposed to, you know, when you see that kind of thing in a lot of literary fiction, it turns out to be the struggle is the important part. No. In this one, the fact that she's like quotes falling in love with the girl who's the bike messenger, that's the important part. So a mood, exactly. So yes, I'm only halfway through, but that's my current thing that I am reading, and I am enjoying it tremendously. Change of Plan by KJ, no last name.
I mean, you've reminded me that KJ Charles exists, particularly the Magpie Lords books. If you're looking for SF and F, I will warn for suicidal ideation in many of those. And I'm very much looking. Yeah, they're great.
Books, yeah.
Yes, which is I'm also looking forward to the Jasmine Throne, which came out 2 weeks ago, which is an FF Indian kind of epic fantasy, and has sold out everywhere and is now in a second printing. So I'm sitting here going, I pre-ordered you, where is my book? But there was a problem at my bookshop and they didn't manage to get me a copy. And I'm like,
it's by Tasha Shuri, we should add as well.
Yes, by Tasha Shuri. And Django, you had pondered.
I have, just some ones from my recent reading. Mike Brooks's The Black Coast does some wonderful things with gender and queerness, you know, in among many characters. That's an ensemble book. Adrian Tchaikovsky's The Doors of Eden has a great queer main couple. It's, you know, very much what you were talking about, Macy, in that it is not primarily a romance. It's a very plot-centered book, but we have this a queer main couple and a trans main character, which is great. There's a book coming out in November called Leech by Hiron Ennis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's E-N-N-E-S. And it was, I read that as an advance copy, and it was wonderful, although it has all of the content warnings, because it's the main character is a sentient viral parasite that takes control of people's brains. So there's a whole bunch of squicky stuff in there, but there's a whole bunch of really interesting stuff as well. So those would be the ones that I would you know, pick from my most recent list.
I did remember a couple more, one of which is, if you are in the mood for YA, Melinda Lowe's Ash is amazing, and Claire Bartlett's The Winter Duke, which is an FF ice princess accidental marriage when her whole family gets put under a sleeping curse, and then there's like weird mermaids. It's amazing and like hugely underhyped because it's FF and not MM, and YA is really, really into MM, and so more attention for Claire.
Yes, I've read The Winter Duke. It was lovely.
It's amazing. I love it. And then
sorry, I'm going to say, if you can all email me your recommendations, we can keep them out, so that participants have a list in writing. I mean, sorry, audience has a list in writing.
We can do so, or we can probably pull them from the video. The other one, all of, I think, the contributors who have books, those books are queer. I think that they have at least one queer book, if they have any books, like K.A. Door's Assassins of Gadid, and Yoon-Ha Lee's books are not romances, but they are queer.
Yes. Now, we do have some questions coming in from the audience now. So I'm just going to read these out, trying to switch screens as I was mentioning earlier. So question from Liz in the webinar. So where do you think the next steps are for the kind of mainstreaming of queer narratives you were talking about? Yes, so it's a long question. I very much noticed that the big exception to this isn't about the struggle theme you talked about was Neon Yang's beautiful Princess, Shield Maiden, Witch and Wolf, which handles exactly that kind of thing for a pair of trans characters. So do you have any thoughts on where things are going in that regard? Sorry about scrambling my words. I hope the question was clear.
I think we didn't have an explicit, we don't want it to be about the struggle. We said that we welcome things that are also about other things. like we left that to the author's choice. So I think that was just a little bit what people chose to send in, and never going to step on Neon's preferences to write what they wanted to write. But I think that it is important. Well, also I object a little bit to the concept of mainstreaming queer, because what queer means is I'm not gay as in happy, I'm queer as in fuck you. And I don't know. I don't want to try to sanitize everything. I want to say that bigotry is wrong, but I want to say that being weird is fine, and you don't have to be mainstreamed to be okay. And that's probably not what you meant, questioner. So I don't want to twist that either. But like, I don't need everyone to accept everything that every queer person does. I just need them to be able to like let them go and be at peace with it. You know?
If we rephrase the question though, you know, we're seeing increasing diversity of stories in more mainstream places in the genre now. What do you think? Are there further steps along that route that you'd like to see?
Oh, I think massively. Go on.
Oh, sorry, I was just thinking, because what I got from the question was, what do we think will be next? And on that, I don't know what will be next, but I think we're definitely well entrenched into this is interesting, and this is what, there's at least a large number of people are buying it, and therefore it's worth, from a capitalist money making, this is a business traditional mainstream perspective, it is worth continuing to support these stories because then people buy them and we make money. And that's also part of the changing societal values, which is also what I really love about sci-fi and fantasy, and what Django was saying of you can create any world you want. But then the beauty of that is you create the world you want, readers read it and say, that looks like an amazing world, why don't I live in it? I think I'm just going to believe that I live in it. And then we continue on, which is, I think, a lot of the popularity, that we see from middle grade readers tend to read a lot more sci-fi and wild and wacky adventures than as we get older than like the literary group do. And I think this is definitely part of that. What's the world we're building? What world do we want to live in? And so the more we see of these stories, the more they will sort of change on their own, perhaps, and to reflect the world that we live in or that we are close to living in. Maybe that's
I think that there is something about the sort of the breadth of queer culture being more visible, you know, that certainly in romance there's a huge tendency for for queer romances, the most popular ones to be two cis white men.
Well,
so
and that's what I was going to say, is that I think that in SF&F, what I want to see is more books like the Jasmine Throne. I want to see more books that allow a non-Western, non-white queer perspective, more books like An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon, which is an amazing sci-fi generation ship antebellum South about being Black and queer and intersex that is completely different to, you know, red, white and royal blue. I think that we have a lot of red, white and royal blue. And that is not doing nothing, but it's doing something very constrained. It's like how it is simultaneously a great thing and an infuriating thing that you can buy Pride merch at Target. I'm just like, it's a great social barometer that this is mainstream acceptable, but also, what? That's not what any of this is about.
Yeah. Another question. This one's from Caro on Twitter. So is there a kind of story that you would have loved to see in the collection that wasn't submitted?
I think that's a Janine question.
That's a Janine question.
I don't know. I love seeing all the kinds of stories. I think I would have really liked to see, first of all, I would have liked to see some more science fiction come my way, because there was a lot of fantasy. Again, because I think the sword image is very swords. But I think I really would have liked, and this might be a little weird, to see one of the ladies in the couple be non-human, like observably non-human. Even rock monster might be too close, right? Because there is one. There's
the troll, right?
There's a troll, and there's a frost giant in this one. But
and
those are
the underworld, the
close.
Persephone one.
The underworld is they're human. but there's, you know, other people in it. But I mean, like, I don't know, a tentacle monster, something made out of rocks, something that's gaseous, right? Someone who is gaseous, like you're not going to have the same thing. I don't know. That's the direction. I would love to have seen one of those, right?
But
You can
female.
be
Or to have
really different.
ontological
Female for
questions,
these,
right.
yes. It has to be all female, of course, because of the anthology, but, or I guess non-binary with female associations. You get the idea.
Whatever,
But
whatever gender is to a gaseous monster, yeah.
exactly,
Right,
whatever
that's
gender is to a gaseous monster, that's, or non-monster. Why are you stereotyping this poor
I'm
gaseous
sorry, I'm
woman?
sorry.
But
Feature.
to see, because I think that goes back, Macy, in fact, a little bit to your, oh my gosh, you find it at Target, is things that look human are at Target and things that are meant for gaseous monsters are not at Target. And it's the thing, one of the things I guess that's weird that I like about science fiction and fantasy from all perspectives is that you can make things that seem very outside of normal life. And so people don't realize that this is like a truly queer story. You would in Silk and Steel, but you can make something so far outside of what we do in normal life that you don't realize as you are reading it, that it is teaching you a moral lesson, not because it's a moralizing story, but because you are immersed in the world.
Right.
If that makes
Kind
sense.
of breaking your
Anyone other than me.
expectations.
Yes.
No, it kind of does. It does. It's like Mothman is gay, right? The queer community has decided that Mothman is theirs. Like, sure, why not? Or there's a lot of discourse around like how queer again, I'm just going to swear all over this podcast, how queer the entire concept of monster fucking is. Right? Because it's something outside of norms, and it's saying that like, I care enough about this non-human creature that I'm going to put myself outside of what it means to be a human in a relationship. I'm taking myself off the escalator of heteroromantic patriarchy. I'm going to go fuck the monster instead.
It's the escalators
that the
over there and
next
I'm out in the
anthology?
field. Yeah.
I mean, you're outside of heteronormativity 2.4 children, aren't you? So,
yeah, well,
so in that sense, it's queer, but
Is that the next anthology? Is it
No.
monster fucking?
no, it's not, because
is
I'm not
that
doing
the
that.
title of the anthology?
No.
You haven't
Good
found
luck,
something that I
Django, good
refuse to
luck.
edit yet. So
Cool. So next question, this is from Ruth on Facebook. Any queer fan fiction recommendations?
Oh God.
See, this is
Well,
Macy question.
now let's see, my AO3 rec list is
Listeners.
like 465
what do you want,
items
buddy?
long.
Because I have at this point 88 hours of yelling about fan fiction. If you want fanfic recs, go to the Be the Serpent podcast, browse around for an episode that sounds like you're interested in it. I want to say the last one, the one we're doing is Diana Wynne Jones, so that's no helpful. The last one we did had some Hunger Games fanfic in it. We've got some upcoming that have Untamed fanfic, but normally we do it around a topic. So if you want ghosts, go to that episode. If you want vampires, go to that episode. If you want spies, go to that episode. And then we link a ton of fanfic. Fanfic is, I will argue, generally queer even when it's straight. But generally it's also actually queer, the stuff that we're talking about.
There's something about queering the canon, isn't it? Is one of the big motives of fanfic writers. I don't know if you saw my ears go up when you said The Untamed, but I'll definitely have to listen to that one.
Oh, we have an episode on The Untamed. I think it's like 61, 62, somewhere down there. Emily can tell me which one, but there are many, many fanfics that we could rec.
Yeah, I have a large number I could rec as well, but I'm technically not panelist, so I won't.
I have 670 bookmarks on AO3, I think, and most of them are novel length or longer because I am a problem.
406.
There we go. High five.
I'm afraid I have to not recommend anything because my fanfic reading days are back.
I will get you to read Freeport. Hey everyone, go read Freeport by Maldivore.
I am happy to read fanfic, and I used to read a lot of fanfic, but it was back in the day when I had more time to read and fewer things to read. If I turned my camera to this direction, you'd see that there's literally a pile. And so the things that people send me and books that I buy because they're interesting, and so I can't even get to all the books.
Well, I
Any-
wreck
they can get
Freeport
to all
because
their
it,
books, but
I wreck Freeport because if you don't read fanfic, it's a great fanfic to read because it's basically a sci-fi world-building novel that also has some fanfic in it, but other stuff that Maldoror does is also good. So there's one for you.
Yeah, and ask me on Twitter if you want all of the Rex. And Janine, have you got any? Are you a fanfic reader?
oh my gosh, I'm such a fanfic reader. I think I am technically the president in absentia of the Oxford University Folklore and Fanfic Society. So
That
I
happened.
am definitely. How did that happen? Actually, I'm the tyrannist for life, technically.
Amazing.
Was that I started it. It was part of like a live journal community a bajillion years ago. We won't talk about when I was at university. And yeah,
So live
I
journal.
had a bunch of people who showed up. And of course, as I think you've noticed, we were talking earlier about accents and language here. It's really hard to remember how to speak your own version of English when around other people.
Yeah.
And I said something about somebody should be the I think I was going for tyranny, and I was like, someone should be the tyrannist. Yes. And then somehow that became like, even once I wasn't there, I was still organizing meetings, and then I don't know if they even still meet. Though I did have a meeting of those of us who were there when I was there on Zoom earlier during the
Nice.
pandemic. One of my top favorite pandemic things is all the people who are far away are equally as close to you as the people who are near you. So you may as well have a Oxford fanfic and folklore meeting with people who are in multiple countries.
Yeah, and if there isn't a
Yeah.
society, there should be. So
And if there isn't a Soch, there should be, because see, anybody who's listening and would like to restart that Soch, go for it. And you can ask me for all of my notes. I'll tell you how to play flapjack. Anyway, yeah, no, I have a lot of fanfic recs and things that I have read that I can't find anymore because they were on an Angel Fire site, which no longer exists,
Yeah, that's a
etc.
mood.
The old
Oh my
days.
gosh, when you're looking for it
That's-
and then like somebody's managed to find it on the Wayback Machine, but then it got deleted and you're like, what happened?
Someone will have downloaded it. It'll be fine.
but this is
If
why we have
anybody
the
knows where to
archive.
find Steelheart by Sleeps with Coyotes, I can't find it, and she
Sleeps
purposely
with
took all of her
Coyotes.
things off the internet. Saisuke, I think she's on Tumblr, and she's been posting back some of her old stories, but she's like, nobody reads Highlander anymore. Why does anybody want to read
Good messenger. Good
Steelheart?
messenger.
So I would love to find that if somebody has a copy. That was not helpful at all in fanfic Rex.
Amazing.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think,
went
do
to
we
my
want
own
to,
But if your person who wants fanfic Rex would like to narrow it down a little bit into
yeah, because it's
their
a lot.
fandoms or their topics or their favorite 27 tags, I'm sure that Macy and I can come up with something, and Django can say, oh yeah, back in 1974, I was reading a zine, and
Oh
it was.
God.
I'm just gonna
How
tease
old
you.
do you
like
think
that.
I am?
Well, I don't know how long ago were you last in the fanfic?
My
Back in
mother was in high school
1932.
then.
Yeah.
My
Um,
mother was also in high school, and she wrote fanfic for Star Trek, the original series.
I
It runs in my family.
We are getting
so-
off track again. Did
Yeah,
we
we
want
really
to have
are.
one more
Here-
question,
Sorry.
or are we handing it over to Kate to talk about Glasgow?
I have one more question from the audience, which is from Ali on Facebook. What was the first book that got you into romance reading?
I feel like I have to blame Anne McCaffrey somehow, which is a problem.
Oh God.
Listen,
Oh no.
I was a impressionable young child with access to Pratchett, Wyndham, and whoever the hell it was who wrote Horatio Hornblower, and not much else. And so McCaffrey, who wrote books with women in them, where the woman got to be like the protagonist, was a revelation to me. And so I read a lot of Dragon Riders. Dragon Riders is the problem. And then I kept going to things like Nimish's Ship and the Killer Chandra the Crystal Singer, which are definitely romances, right? You can argue back and forth about the Talents series, which is mostly terrifyingly gross now. Lots of like, you know that thing in Twilight where the werewolf falls in love with the unborn baby? Yeah, McCaffrey did
yeah.
that first.
Is that the one that Foz Meadows was doing along with Dano?
Yeah, well, that's one of
Yeah.
them. So there's a lot of like racism and rape culture, but like when I was 11, 12, 13, and reading books where women got to make choices, right? And women got to demand to be valued and demand to be given respect. That was something that kind of really hooked into me as a kid.
Yeah, I think my romance novel that got me into reading more romances is a more traditional, straight up from the romance novel. I'm pretty sure it's a Harlequin, in fact. It was Highland Barbarian by Ruth Langan, which is the first of a 4-book series. And I have not been able to find a copy of it in recent years, so I have no idea if it's actually any good or if it's just, yeah, preteen Janine thought that this was amazing. Right. But much like you said, Jennifer Macy, yeah, like the first chapter is all about our heroine, who is the oldest daughter of this Highland clan, and she's going to take over as it's a historical, right? So it's like, I don't remember that Queen Elizabeth, I think, is alive, or maybe it's Queen Mary. I don't remember which queen it is, because obviously it's set in the Scottish Highlands. So yeah, it's over there. So clearly she's not actually going to be able to do this, but she thinks she can, and she's, rallied the clan troops, sort of thing. And then she is, of course, by the end of chapter 1, abducted by some people who are like doing all this Highland politics, and then falls in love. But she's got all of her own agency. Like, she gets abducted, but like she finds ways to make life really miserable for her captor. And then when she gets out, she's like, and now I'm basically laird of my clan again. So here's what we're doing. And
lots of stabbing.
Lots of stabbing. There is a lot of stabbing.
Hey.
A lot of stabbing. But there's also, it's a very clear, like, there's a plot to historical romances of this kind, right? And it follows every single beat. What chapter is going to be the sex chapter, and what chapter is going to be the second kidnapping chapter. This is, I think, the only book in which there's kidnapping, because she gets kidnapped by the bad guys as opposed to by the good guys who are just politicking. The whole thing.
And you have to have the grand gesture at a certain point. You have to have the misunderstanding. Yep. I wrote a fantasy novel that's pinned on romance beats, and so it's very fascinating because they're very perfect. They're perfectly laid out. They're much more organized than drama is. And they come at specific times. Oh yes, very specific.
In order to hit that emotional high when you're doing it. Yeah, it's
very scientific. Romance writers are very scientific.
They're very good at it too. But anyway, that was the first one that convinced me that obviously romances were amazing and I should continue reading them.
How about you, Django?
For me, I don't read a lot of romance, so mostly it comes from my wife, who gives me things to read when she thinks they would catch my interest. Not necessarily when they're the best things, because she reads a lot of romance and she can read things and say, this is good, but you wouldn't like it, which I don't know if that's a judgment on me. But I kind of came into it through YA, I think, that there's a lot of YA where these genre lines are not as clear, and they're sort of more romance-y than others. I don't know what I would specifically put as the start of it. When I went to write a YA book, they gave me, and by they, I again mean my wife, who I go to for all things books. Casey gave me a list of YAs that I needed to read to have sort of minimal genre fluency. And so going through those kind of got me into reading more along those lines.
Nice.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. So we're coming towards the end of the time. Does any of you have any points you'd like to make, any closing remarks, or anything coming up in the future that you'd like to mention that people should keep an eye out for? Sorry, that's a bit of an open question, isn't it? Go for it.
If people have logistics-wise, you can still buy Silk and Steel. It's on Amazon, and it's print on demand, or you can get it in ebook. So if you have been intrigued by our conversation here, feel free to get it. And then sort of on a more personal note, if you have been intrigued or you liked Silk and Steel, consider Hard Reboot, which is my novella from Tor.com that was originally supposed to be part of Silk and Steel. So it's very much on the same theme.
And when is that out? Is that already out?
It's been out for about 2 weeks.
Nice.
So you can get it, hard copy in your favorite bookstore or on ebook wherever you get your ebooks.
All I have is I have a podcast if you want to hear more yelling about queer stuff and or fanfic. betheserpent.podbean.com.
I will say thank you so much for reading our book. Or contemplating reading our book, or buying our book and not having read it and then lending it to somebody else. Regardless, we appreciate that you here at Glasgow 2024 decided to to read us instead of something else.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's been really enjoyable, and thank you all for coming on our event. So I do need to do a couple of minutes of closing remarks about the Glasgow bid. Yes, so our next event is the 21st of July at 7 p.m. It has Stephen, I hope I can pronounce this right, Stephen Iron and Cameron Johnson with Angry Robot Publishing. Tickets will be available on Eventbrite shortly. Sorry, I need to practice reading things off of a screen. Yes, so we've just had on our Glasgow 24 blog, we've had a whole series on Pride Month, you know, lots and lots of different angles. I think it was about 11 or 12 blog posts altogether on the subject of queerness in SFF from all sorts of different angles. If people want my romance recommendations, one of the blog posts is by me, so please do go and read it. So please do keep an eye on the Glasgow 24 social media. We've got lots of things coming up. And of course, please do either think about supporting us. You can sign up to be a supporter. You can sign up to be a volunteer. We are hoping to bring the Worldcon to Glasgow in 2024. So we would love to have you on board with that. So thanks very much, everybody. I think I've finished 3 minutes early, unless anyone has anything they want to say. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.